whereas Don Dixon has a very certain reputation of keen perspicaciousness and a history of telling it like it is. Upon Don's passing of a gaggle of conference delegates, it could often be heard in hushed whispers, "Looks like the devil does wear Prada." And whereas Virginia Ferris had a very important question to ask Byron's student Adam after Adam's presentation, and whereas Virginia once held Byron's work with a certain modicum of esteem, and whereas Byron was not paying attention when Virginia was asking her question, and whereas Virginia subsequently addressed her question to Byron, and whereas Byron responded to Virginia's query with, "I'm sorry, Virginia, I wasn't paying attention." Virginia has now resolved to reevaluate Byron's status. And whereas Brent Sipes is the SON treasurer, outgoing now, and whereas Parwinder Gruel was the vice president, and whereas Parwinder is in charge of the scientific program, and whereas Brent Sipes was in charge of handling all of the society's money, and whereas Parwinder requested money to support the scientific program, and whereas Brent Sipes told Parwinder that there is no money to support the scientific program this year, and whereas incoming SON Treasurer Inga Zasada provided the executive board with accurate budget statements which indicated that there were indeed funds in excess of several $1,000s allocated to the scientific program this year. And whereas Parwinder has not seen a single penny of that. And whereas Brent Sipes sends best regards to the executive board as he rotates off the executive board. And whereas Brent Sipes sends his best regard message while leaving for the airport to catch a plane to Malaysia. We are all left wondering. Good grief. This is your society. And whereas a certain fellow of the society is known for his acute skills at navigating pubs, and whereas this distinguished gentleman is also a man of great stature in the European Society of Nematologists, and whereas the European Society of Nematologists is now concerned about upholding its reputation by its delegates, and wish for a most upright, forth, and noble organization to be represented, it appears that their concerns were sufficient such that they mandated that this certain member, Rollo Perry, be accompanied on his trip to the United States by an appropriate chaperone, Maurice Mons. And whereas the esteemed Professor Mons is Belgian, and whereas Professor Mons has been widely known to express his preference for Belgian-style beverages, and whereas Professor Mons was most pleasantly surprised to learn that there was a new Belgian beverage available at the hotel bar, and whereas Professor Mons imbibed his first New Belgian pastiche with great anticipation that all expectations of taste and satisfaction would be met, and whereas Professor Mons instead was seen to be subsequently wearing a most crestfallen and despondent demeanor, it must be inferred that Professor Mons and the Fat Tire Brewing Company indeed do not agree on what constitutes a Belgian beer. And whereas Rollo Perry was approached with great adoration by an admiring student who told him he had purchased Rollo's book, and whereas Rollo responded by asking, "Which one?" And whereas the student was immediately confronted with the implausible notion that Rollo could have been responsible for more than one such contract. And whereas the book the student was referring to was co-authored by Maurice Mons, and whereas Maurice Mons was standing right next to Rollo, and whereas the textbook under discussion prominently features large images of both authors, whereas the student had absolutely no recognition of the book's second author, it is resolved that the image of Professor Mons must have been photoshopped significantly in order to improve his appearance. And whereas Russ Ingham is the past president of the society, and whereas President Ingham was tasked with watching over the society to make sure the meetings run smoothly, apparently his duties to watch over the membership includes hanging out with them and